Hi guys, welcome back to the Home and Homestead. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and if not, thanks for joining me again today. My name is Rebecca, and together we're making some homemade spaghetti sauce, and we'll be doing it a little bit different than you've seen me make tomato sauces in the past because we will be using frozen tomatoes. This is a great way to use up tomatoes that you've been harvesting slowly from your garden, or maybe you picked up some on sale from the grocery store or farmer's market, and you may have a quantity that you have been freezing and now you finally have enough to do some food preservation. So let's go water bath can some homemade spaghetti sauce. So we have a number of Roma tomato plants in our garden this year, and we've been harvesting and fresh eating quite a bit. I've been doing some small batch canning, and I wanted to keep putting some Romas away into the freezer until I had enough quantity that I could do a nice size food preservation project to share with you guys. And this year I thought I'd do some spaghetti sauce. So by freezing tomatoes, it's a great way to preserve them. You don't have to do anything special. Just stick them into a zip top freezer bag and stick them into the freezer. And you can keep adding to the bag as the year goes, or if you find a really good sale at the grocery store or farmer's market, you can stock up and stick them in the freezer till you're ready to do something with them or have enough. And another thing that I've noticed that when you use frozen tomatoes, they're really easy to peel because they've gone through the freezing process, and then once they thaw, I've had these in the refrigerator thawing overnight, the peel should just come right off, and then you're able to process them however you like from there. Now with my spaghetti sauce, pizza sauce, and salsas, I don't tend to remove the seeds. You can check out my video on how I make homemade pizza sauce, as well as my zucchini salsa video. I go over how I prepare tomatoes a couple of different ways. You can check out my ketchup 2 ways and a number of barbecue sauce recipes using tomatoes where I go that extra step or remove the seeds, and that sauce will have no seeds, skins, or anything like that in it. But like I said, for spaghetti sauce, pizza sauce, and salsas, I typically just leave them in, and I use an immersion blender later, and it helps keep the sauce nice and smooth. So in this bag here, we have a bunch of Roma tomatoes that were in the freezer. So they're very soft to the touch here. Let me get my garbage bowl. So what I'm going to do is just use my tomato corer, remove that central core piece, and just hold it over the bowl that I'll be measuring my tomatoes in, and the peel just comes right off. No blanching or anything required. Then I just take my hands and kind of squeeze it a little bit to mash it. So if you were to use fresh tomatoes, then you would want to, blanch them, remove the peels and the core. And as I said earlier, I have a couple of videos that go over that technique in detail. If you're using frozen tomatoes like I am, you could also remove the seeds after this step by just putting it through a food mill. That would kind of smash up the tomatoes and take out those little seeds. So you'd have a really nice sauce left. So let me continue to process these tomatoes here. And once I get the quantity of tomatoes that I have for the sauce, then I'll know how many batches of the spaghetti sauce I'll be making. Alright, so I have enough tomatoes prepared to make one nice batch of my homemade spaghetti sauce. So here I have my 6-quart Nesco roaster oven, and to this I'm going to add the tomatoes that we prepared. For a batch of tomato sauce that I use for spaghetti sauce, pizza sauce, and just regular tomato sauce, I consider 6 to 8 cups of prepared tomatoes. So this is a little bit over 8 cups, so it'll be a nice batch of the spaghetti sauce. I'll turn the roaster up to 300 degrees, and to this I will add a 1/4 cup of lemon juice and 2 tablespoons of sugar. I like my spaghetti sauce a little bit on the sweeter side rather than really salty. And 1 tablespoon of minced garlic. Next we'll add 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. That's 3 tablespoons of sugar. And 3 teaspoons of oregano. One teaspoon of onion powder, 2 teaspoons of canning salt, one teaspoon of black pepper, and 1 teaspoon of basil. Now I'll mix everything together. We're going to let this cook at 300 degrees until this comes up to a nice boil, and then we'll continue to cook it for about 2 hours. We don't want it to cook down as much as, say, a pizza sauce, because you want more of a thinner type of sauce so you can put it over your pasta or use in casseroles and baked dishes and things like that. All right, let's put the cover on. We'll let this cook. I'll come back and check in about 15 minutes and stir it, see how it's doing. You just want to come and check periodically and give it a nice stir so that it doesn't stick or scorch. So we'll let this cook for a while. So it's been about 15 minutes. And here it's just sizzling and cooking away. So I'm actually going to turn it down to 250 degrees. And we'll let this keep cooking down. Alright, so our spaghetti sauce is cooking away in our Nesco roaster. And since we're just doing a single batch of spaghetti sauce today, I thought I'd use my Presto Digital Pressure Canner in the water bath canning mode, or boiling water method. What's nice about this Presto Digital Canner is you can do both pressure canning and water bath canning. So I'll show you how to do the water bath method today. So I have my canner here, and I filled it with 3 quarts of water to the bottom fill line here. And this is only for when we're heating up our jars. When you water bath can, you need to have water over the level of the jars. We'll go over that more later. But for this step of the process, you just fill it to that line like I just showed you. Now we're going to plug it in. So it's electric. There we go. And on the screen here, it says pressure can on the left and boiling water can on the right. So we'll select boiling water can. And here's where it's asking for the processing time for what we will be canning today. We're doing spaghetti sauce, so that'll be a 35-minute processing time. So we'll turn this up to 35 minutes. Press the play button. Now it says insert jars. So I have 6 pint jars, and the single batch of the spaghetti sauce will probably only yield about 3 to 4 jars, but I'd rather prepare more jars than necessary than not enough. So I'll do 6 jars today. And what I did was I filled them about halfway full of water. And we'll stick them into the Presto canner. And this water will not be wasted. Once the jars are warmed up and the water is discarded, I'll actually put the water right into the canner, and that'll help to fill it a little bit more so we get the proper amount of water for our water bath canning project. So you just stick them right in there. Now what we're going to do is put the lid back on. It says install, remove, and lock, and there's a little U shape. The biggest thing to remember when using this appliance is to remove the regulator cap. We won't be using this at all in this process. And in fact, if you have it on, it may give you some error messages. So I just take it off and set it in another area of the kitchen so that it's not used at all. If you were doing pressure canning, then you would use that regulator cap. So now that we've inserted the jars and put the cover on, now we're just going to lower the sensor arm and turn this little green tab, and we'll press the play button. So now it knows that the jars are in here, we have water in here, water in the jars, and the system is starting to warm these jars for us. You want to do this process so that then the jars are nice and warm for when you put your hot spaghetti sauce or whatever you might be canning into the jars. It just helps to prevent the occurrence of breakage. So now we'll just let this do its thing, and once it's completed, it'll beep twice, and we can move on to the next step, which is filling our jars with our homemade spaghetti sauce. Alright, so the digital canner just beeped twice, and now it says fill jars, and there's a little status line here. So all we have to do is just move the lever arm and remove the lid. And now we're just going to remove these jars, and again, as I said earlier, I'm going to be dumping the water right back into this canner because they're water bath canning, and we need that extra water in there, and I don't want to waste it. So we'll put that in here, and I'll place the warmed jars on this little pad. We can get it filled with our homemade spaghetti sauce. This process of jar warming only takes about 15 minutes, so if you're cooking something to be canned for water bath canning, I would say start getting your digital canner ready for this jar warming process about 20 minutes before you would need to start filling the jars. There we go. So now the canner has water to just about the second line in there. So all we need to do now is fill these jars with our homemade spaghetti sauce, and we'll get them right back into the water bath canner to finish the canning process. Alright, so the spaghetti sauce has been cooking for about 2 hours. So I will turn the roaster oven off, and it's cooked down nicely. We still have some larger chunks of tomato, so now I'm going to go in with an immersion blender, and that'll just help to kind of puree it up a little bit and get a nice smooth sauce for us. Since this is for a spaghetti sauce, I'm actually going to leave it slightly chunky. That's what's nice about making your own sauces. You can make it how you like it. Okay, so our jars are nice and warmed. So now we just need to fill them, and we're going to fill them to a 1/2 inch headspace. So just use my little canning ladle here and a funnel and fill them to about a 1/2 inch headspace. That's usually to about the bottom of the threads on a canning jar. You could also use a headspace measuring tool. They have that in the canning essential kits by various companies. As always, I'll include the different equipment and items that I mention or use in this video. So if there's anything you need or are interested in purchasing for yourself, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I mention a certain item. It smells so good. You can really smell the oregano and the basil. Makes me want to make some spaghetti and garlic bread for supper tonight. And I should mention that the last time I stirred it, I gave it a taste and I wanted to add a little bit more sugar, so I added 1 more tablespoon. So I did a total of 4 tablespoons or a 1/4 cup of sugar. But you can adjust those seasonings to taste. And how I do preparing my sauces when I'm cooking in a Nesco roaster oven is I'll just set a 1/2 hour on my kitchen timer, and about every 1/2 hour I'll come in, stir, check how things are cooking down, see if the temperature needs to be turned up or down, and just kind of go from there. That way it cooks nicely and you don't have any burning or scorching, and your sauce cooks down well for you. All right, so we have 4 pint jars here. I'm just going to grab a paper towel. I'm just going to wipe down the rims. This is just a paper towel with some water on it. You just want to wipe off any food particles that may have fallen onto the rim there. Now we'll add our lid followed by the ring. You just want to tighten the ring finger tight. The ring is just holding this lid on while it's processing the jar. And then once the jar is processed and it cools, the lid will suction down and the ring can actually be removed at that point the next day, after they sit for 12 to 24 hours. Okay, let's get these into the canner. So we have 4 pint jars here. The water level is to about here, so I need to add more water. We want water to cover the jars about 1 inch. So I have some nice hot water here. Maybe just a little bit more should do the trick. There we go. And I like to fill the digital canner for water bath canning as we did today and just add water later, because it's much easier to add water than to try to take it out once you have all the jars in. And this digital canner can hold 8 regular mouth pint jars or 7 wide mouth pint jars. And it can hold 10 regular mouth half pint jars and 7 wide mouth half pint jars when you're doing the water bath method or the boiling water method in this particular canner. You cannot do quart water bath canning in this particular canner because there isn't enough space to allow for the water to cover the jars. But you can do pints and half pints, and that works out just fine. You're doing a single batch of a recipe. It's a really handy canner. So now what we're going to do is put the lid back on. So again, install, switch it to locked, or lower the sensor arm and turn the green knob, and then we'll press play. So now we have the original timer that we set, which is 35 minutes for processing time for our spaghetti sauce. So now the canner will do its thing. And when it's finished, it'll beep and let us know, and we can move on from there. Now as our spaghetti sauce is canning in our digital canner, I wanted to go ahead and clean my Nesco roaster oven. So what I did was I filled it with water to about the food line, added a little bit of dish detergent. So I'll just put the lid back on. I'll turn it up to about 350, and it pretty much will just bubble up and boil and clean itself. And that just makes it a lot easier than trying to sit there and scrape off the cooked on food particles that may have occurred while you were cooking your sauce. Alright, so while the spaghetti sauce jars are processing, I had this Nesco roaster oven self-cleaning basically. As I mentioned earlier, I filled it with some water and some dish soap, and it's been cooking for about a half hour. And so all of these food particles that were kind of stuck on and hard are now soft, and I can just wipe this off and clean it very easily. So I'm just going to unplug it. I've turned it off, and I'll let this cool completely, and it'll be easy to clean now. The water bath processing of our homemade spaghetti sauce has finished. The machine beeped 4 times, and now it says cool. And it started with a 5-minute timer, and now it's down to 4 minutes. So since we're not pressure canning, we're only water bath canning, we can turn this little green knob and remove the lid. And now these jars are just sitting in the canner like they would be if you used a traditional water bath canner for 5 minutes before we put it over to the cooling and sealing area on a pad like I have off to the side here. So let this finish the 5-minute timer, and then we'll move the jars onto the cooling and sealing area. Okay, so the 5-minute timer has finished. The machine beeped 10 times, and now it says done with a little check mark, and it says boiling water can. That's because that's what we did. So we're just going to hold this little X button here for 3 seconds, and that reset it, so we're back to the beginning. So now we can move the jars over to our cooling and sealing area here. And this will allow the jars a chance to cool and seal over the next 12 to 24 hours. We'll listen for the little pings. That will be the suctioning sound of the lids that we placed on our canning jars. And after 12 to 24 hours, I can make sure everything's sealed properly and label them for placing down in my canning pantry. So let's take a closer look at our finished homemade spaghetti sauce. Alright guys, here we have our single batch of homemade spaghetti sauce that we water bath canned together in the Presto Digital Canner. It's technically a pressure canner and water bath canner in one, and I hope you enjoyed seeing how to use it today. It works great for small batches such as this. If I were to be doing a really large batch of the homemade spaghetti sauce, I would have used my traditional stovetop water bath canner, and if you have one of those, you can check out my video on homemade pizza sauce. That is a very similar process for the water bath canning of that. And if you have the Presto Digital Pressure Canner, you can follow my instructions today on how to use that for the water canning method. So hopefully you enjoyed this recipe today for the homemade spaghetti sauce. What's great about it is, other than the tomato and lemon juice amounts, you can play around with the spices and make your spaghetti sauce however you prefer. If you like it really sweet or salty or spicy, you can change up those ingredients that I mentioned in my recipe today. And if you use a Nesco roaster oven, be sure to try my tip on cleaning, because it really makes that process much easier. Well, if you'd like more inspiration on other food preservation methods and recipes, you can check out my food preservation playlist, as well as some other recipes that I have in my recipes and in the kitchen playlist. Well, if you're new to the channel or haven't done so yet, I would really appreciate you subscribing. If you enjoyed this or any other videos that you watch, be sure to give them a thumbs up. Well, I hope you're having a wonderful day. See you next time. Take care.